So I'm here today with Dr. Eric Kurtz, and my experience with you, Eric, has been a fabulous journey. I got to meet you many years ago, and I've learned a lot from just talking with you. And today, I'm bringing you to share your story, who you are, where you came from, how you ended up being in this position to bring such valuable information for people, especially in the subject we're going to get into in a minute. But if you could give us a snapshot of who you are so the audience can get to know you a little bit before we get into the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Ian. Basically, my background the last 30 or 35 years has been in the area of starting companies, conducting new cutting edge research in the areas of product development, and that includes both unique and novel formulation breakthroughs as well as the discovery of new therapeutic compounds. And especially the last 10 years, the focus has been on natural compounds because we really have a library now of many very interesting natural compounds, not drugs, but compounds that existed in nature. And while I've conducted research on the side of drug development with full clinical studies that are required for the FDA process and so on in my early history, the last 10 or 12 years, the focus has really been on what can you bring into reality that will actually benefit people now, because a new drug really takes around 7 years to get approved and developed, and then it's probably close to hundreds of millions of dollars now to get that drug approved. So we don't have time, most of us don't have time really to wait for that process, but we do have time for developing good science that will deliver products that will work. So the same work ethic and the same discipline, which is a scientific discipline of research, is applied to natural product development. And that also, by the way, in addition to formulations, it includes extractions and purification of compounds and removal of possibly other undesirable compounds or elements that might be in those natural extracts. Especially the last 10 years, the focus has been on genetic research on the building blocks for everything really in our body, which is at the level of the genes. And at the level of the genes, all kinds of phenomena are occurring as we get older and as we age. And we found through screening studies, research screening studies, where we've taken and isolated individual compounds, both individually and in combination, and screened them against the entire human genome. And that includes genes that are involved in receptors, and we'll go more into defining what those things are as we move along in the discussion. But it's really the foundational building blocks for everything start with the genes.
So today, the subject is really around improving the quality of life for people who are starting around 30 years old and up. And then the older a person gets, the more they have to focus on ensuring that anything that would compromise quality of life is dealt with. And what I find fascinating about your discovery that we're going to reveal today is involving muscle strength as well as brain strength. And the extract that you have discovered that is all natural is profoundly effective. And so if you could get into where the foundation of that is and what this discovered, that to me, this is a significant breakthrough product that you've come up with. It's unique, it's novel. There's nothing like it anywhere in the world. And what you're seeing already and the studies that you've done, if you could just give the essence of that, what that means to us as people, before you get right into the slides to really go into the details. What does it mean overall? What are we going to experience physically? People in our age group, we're in our 60s, and it's really exciting because this is, to me, a master key that you have. And so I'd like you to reveal the big rocks that you've moved with this.
Yeah, so at a certain point, it becomes critical, especially with natural products in the nutraceutical industry, to discover or find formulations or compounds that are capable of tangible effects on people. And that means not just uh, placebo effect or marketing things, but real science. And even beyond real science, if there's a product or a formulation that you can take that you experience a noticeable difference, not only in how you feel, but in your mobility, your ability to move around, and your quality of life. As you mentioned, over 30, most people start experiencing a continual decline in mobility, which really is a reflection of the decline that's occurring in the muscles. And so within the muscles, all these different genetic building blocks are starting to degrade. And in addition, on top of that, there's different signaling pathways that are involved, which those genes need to send messages to the rest of the parts of the body and also to the brain, because really we don't exist. We're not just muscle, we're also mind or brain. There's a intimate connection between the brain and the muscle. And actually, the old saying that the brain is like a muscle is true, because a lot of the same gene systems that are involved in muscle are also reflected or involved in the brain and the functioning of the brain. So with this steady decline in strength in the muscles, which also hampers mobility or our ability to get around, to get off the couch and to get out and walk or exercise, it becomes harder and harder. The motivation becomes harder, but we need to think that when that happens, when the brain sends a signal to the body to move the body, right, to get up from the chair or the couch, that the brain had to send that signal. And then correspondingly, the muscle and the parts of the body need to initiate that spark, which moves the body. So the brain and the body are intimately combined or intertwined. And what's really fascinating is many of these genes involved in the attempt to rejuvenate muscle and movement are also very intimately involved in brain function and also with dementia and things that start decline with aging in the brain. So similar, not just similar, but even the same gene systems are involved in both processes.
Right now, how does that apply to somebody, say, that has been compromised because they're not finding out about this until they're much older? Can things be reversed back to a youthful state with these compounds?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes. Without the research that's been conducted over the last 10 or 15 years, where science has been able to unravel some of the phenomena involved in not just aging, but in the decline in muscle strength and the decline in energy. Because remember, the third component we're talking about here is also energy itself. And to provide real energy, you need to provide the spark that comes, especially as we get over 30, with revitalizing or rejuvenating or regenerating those building blocks that are involved in the start of the entire process at the
Mm.
again at the level of the gene. So all of those things are tied in here, and the ability to experience better clarity and better memory and better functionality of the brain, which is equally important to people who are experiencing a loss in muscle strength and movement of their body as they get older. Again, it's a quality of life issue. And so what we're trying to cover here is a comprehensive type of solution, which is a complex formulation, which includes multiple components, multiple molecules, each one which has been identified as being important for boosting or tapping down or decreasing the activity of good genes or bad genes, and also signaling pathways and enzyme systems or gates. This is, in a way, a systemic solution, a very comprehensive system-wide solution, which involves the building blocks, the pathways, and the different energy systems that are involved in this whole process.
Is really supporting the body's ability to keep itself healthy, whereas otherwise it would just be losing its way without these different nutritional molecules that the body absolutely has to have. In your books, is this something that's an absolute must have for people to sustain quality of life on that muscle system, muscle structure, brain connection to the muscles? What would they do with that? What would happen without this?
They would experience, each person has a slightly different genetic profile, but generally speaking, we can group most people into the category of 99% of the people are going to have the genetic profile, which means in addition to all the other genes that they inherit from their parents, which will have to do with disease predictability and those type of things. The least you can do is to boost or regenerate or revitalize those genes, those building blocks that have gone into decline. And that includes also changing the way we process energy sources, because what we'll talk about a little bit later is that energy sources in muscle involve two different systems. It would be like the gasoline or the diesel fuel for the muscle. What drives that system? And there are two systems involved. One involves fatty acid oxidation, which is basically we could call fat oxidation, which is a source of energy. And the other
Mhm.
involves glucose or sugar. What starts happening to the body as we age is we start changing our fuel source, the conversion of the energy sources that we have from a glucose type system to a fatty acid oxidation system, which is fat oxidation. So that's, you could also call that thermogenesis. So basically, by burning those energy sources, we derive the basic energy which is involved in firing up the muscles and also, by the way, firing up the brain.
Mhm.
Without that basic foundation, which is just of the different components that we'll talk about later. This, again, is the energy source itself, and working on converting that fuel source from glucose to fat burning or fatty acid oxidation also has a significant impact on metabolic problems like type 2 diabetes, obesity, and all those other type of things. Everyone knows as they get older, they have more of a tendency to gain weight and to experience problems with blood sugar and glucose and so on. And that's another reflection of the phenomena of aging that's going on, where the genes are changing and the signaling pathways are degrading or experiencing a problem with the infrastructure. And that's what we're trying to improve here. So really anybody over the age of 30 who's looking for not just a better prospect, but a tangible change in their ability to face all these different problems that are associated with not just a lack of energy, but movement itself and brain function as well. All three of those things are of critical importance.
And the one thing I noticed, just on a physical observation level, is because I've been in this space for 20 years myself, just observing and learning from people like yourself, is that when people get around 60 years old, they still look pretty good. A lot of them are in still good shape. They have a somewhat of a youthful glow to them. Fast forward 20 years to 80, and it's a significant difference, a deterioration that happens if they're even still alive, because the average age is 75 to 85. And my mission has been to find how to strengthen every link in the chain, because if any link gets weak and breaks, the person literally dies. But to find out what all the links were, and what I'm observing with what you've found out is you have a major link that breaks often with people, where they either pass away at a certain point or they don't even want to stay alive because their quality of life is down so far because of mobility issues, strength issues, or there's muscle wasting and brain wasting. And that's like that 60 to 80-year-old term, where now what I've discovered, and we're adding this now into this whole protocol, is we can actually get healthier and healthier in every category ongoing as we get older, once we have the knowledge and the actual raw materials, molecular, to feed our bodies to get it to get healthier as we go, which breaks the paradigm of people just trying to maintain health. We're talking about improving health, not just trying to hold on to youth, but actually improving it.
That's correct. You're entirely right. Part of what has happened in science, again, over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years even, has been where research in longevity has been focused on significant issues involved in aging. The focal point has arrived at gene profiles associated with fasting, which is caloric restriction, basically reducing food intake, exercise, because everyone knows that exercise is beneficial, but now actually knows why and has identified
Mhm.
the gene sets and the signaling pathways that get activated by exercise. So part of the problem with a lack of mobility is that people are just not getting out and moving around, even just walking. Something as simple as walking a mile or two every day or every other day, not even being able to do that. And the third aspect has to do with what science has found with astronauts, people who have been sent into space. Because remember, one of the big problems that occurs with astronauts or people that are in space flight is a lack of gravity. They're
Hmm.
in a sort of microgravity situation. Because of that, both their muscles and their bones experience significant decline. And after a significant period of space travel, without some type of a change in what they're taking and what they're doing, they're going to arrive at wherever they arrive. Let's say we're able to go on Mars in the future. But if you get there, you can't even move. You can't take the first step onto the planet. It doesn't make a lot of difference. What's been discovered is these same gene building blocks and signaling pathways and factors and enzymes that are involved in this product are also involved and have been identified as being the significant reasons why astronauts experience a decline in muscle strength when they're subjected to microgravity during space travel. And one of those important genes that's been identified is the specific gene that we activate in the perfect strength product. It's only one of many, which we're going to talk about, but it's a
Hmm.
critical one. And that's the FMDC5 gene, which activates a sort of hormone type compound in the body called irisin. And it turns out irisin, which was only discovered in the last 10 years, is a critical gene or hormone that's involved in regenerating muscles and bone, by the way, because
Hmm.
astronauts don't just experience a loss of muscle strength, but they also experience a significant loss in bone strength. Both of those things go hand in hand. And both, if you were to pick the sovereign or the king, that's over numerous other genes that are involved in this process or this issue, irisin would be one of the key genes or hormones that needs to be activated. And the last 5 or 6 years, a huge amount of interesting research related to irisin has been conducted, which has identified this issue and what happens when you start working with, because nobody had really discovered yet compounds that could directly activate irisin, which has been named exerkine. So
Hmm.
exerkine, which is a new terminology, really compounds that are generated by exercise. So now we know scientifically why exercise is so beneficial. We actually know the signaling pathways and the gene sets that are activated. And one of the key genes that are involved is irisin.
Yeah, that kind of leads us to get into the really meat of this issue. Could you do a share screen, Eric, and bring up some of the data you could share with us so we get our head around this a little bit deeper?
Okay, so here we're talking about unlocking the gene pathways, the critical genes that are involved in muscle and brain function, and the pathways and other signaling molecules and enzymes that are involved in transmitting that information from the core level of the gene all the way out to the periphery and the muscles themselves. Because part of the issue is you can activate things within what's called the mitochondria or the engine inside the cells. You also need to have significant effects on the signaling pathways that transmit that energy and those signals to other parts of the body. The basic building blocks that are involved in both muscle and brain involve the genes. And what we've been talking about is changing or rejuvenating from the ground up the building blocks that are involved in this process. And that involves complicated terms like transcription and translation, which is genetic terminology, which we won't go into today. This gets a little complex. But these building blocks involve things called receptors, which you can increase the activity of or you can decrease the activity of. And that's called upregulation or downregulation. The signaling pathways, which also involve the fuel source. And the fuel source, as we get older, starts converting from a a fat oxidation system to more of a glucose, which is a sugar-based system. What we need to do is convert that back to more of a fat-consuming, or what's called fatty acid oxidation system, and burn fat, which is also obviously beneficial for metabolic health. As mentioned before, this also involves enzymes, which have things like second messengers, which are called G protein coupled receptors. They help to facilitate the transmission of the information. And then upstream, this involves proteins and hormones, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, eventually leading to muscles. One key thing that we'll talk about are myokines, as we mentioned before, the fuel source, but also how we process the waste products that are generated by muscle function. And when you start boosting the activity of muscle and the metabolic rates, you have exhaust systems, oxidation products. You need to be able to process those waste products or that exhaust, a catalytic converter does in a car. Again, we had to find a formulation that would modulate multiple different gene receptors, not just a single receptor, but a whole set of different receptors or genes which we've identified and which science also has identified over the last 15 years as being important in this process. So by regulating, which means increasing the activity of a specific gene, that leads to receptor upregulation. And that also interacts with different cofactors that regulate those enzymes. As you can see, this is a system-wide approach. We're attacking a whole spectrum or constellation of different factors, and ultimately leading to a change in muscle kinetics or a rejuvenation of muscle energetics. So to address this issue, we really needed to develop a full system metabolic tune-up, especially as mentioned before, when we get over the age of 30, there's a continual decline in these systems. And to do that, we had to find natural activators or suppressors of a whole group of different genes. Again, that means increasing or decreasing certain receptor activity at the level of the genes. In other words, the genes behind these receptors, which have now been identified. That then stimulates or inhibits different enzymes, which in a way you could think of as the gatekeepers for the system, for the energy systems and the infrastructure, which then redirects these aging signaling pathways, which in a way is like the aging infrastructure of roadways and bridges in a country. That is eventually leading to increase in muscle strength and endurance. Now, I want to emphasize it's not just about muscle strength, it's also about endurance or energy, because we're not just looking for a temporary short burst of energy here. We're looking for a sustained change in energy dynamics. So again, reviewing, we're regulating key genes, enzymes, signaling pathways, and different cofactors involved in muscle protein activity and energy sources. This involves both extracellular and intracellular communication, modulating energy channels and signaling pathways, because there are channels that exist in the body, and they're gatekeepers and traffic cops, you could say, that are involved in the energy facilitating or hampering, inhibiting the energy transfer. Again, the concept of upregulating or increasing the activity of beneficial genes or downregulating or decreasing the activity of the bad genes. And we can do that with natural compounds. That's the fascinating part of the whole discovery, is we've been able to identify natural molecules that all together as a complex are capable of tuning these genes. And again, the same type of phenomena through research, which involves screening with DNA array screening, which is a scientific methodology where different compounds are screened against all the different genes, and also PCR polymer chain reaction. The genes that have been, the most important genes that have been identified in this process are on this chart. We won't get into a lot of detail of what they are, but they've been identified. And the perfect strength process actually changes a person's gene profile by either amplifying all these genes that are on the right side of the column, the blue ones, AMPK, irisin, BDNF, NRF2, and then decreasing things like myostatin, 15-PGDH, and then these other genes, which are also upregulated. These are some of the most important key genes involved, but they're not the only. There's other ones too that are activated, which mainly this is to indicate the comprehensive roadmap which we used to develop the formulation. So what has science been able to learn from exercise, fasting, and space travel? Because these are the three most important things that science has really identified as having the ability to have a profound effect on our metabolism, on aging itself, and on our overall health, or maintaining our overall health. And some of the important things that have been discovered are associated with two gene sets or compounds called myostatin and activin A. And so when we decrease the amount of calories that we consume, which is basically decreasing the amount of food we eat, and when we exercise, it changes our gene profile in the positive direction. What happens to astronauts when they go into space travel? They experience a loss of muscle strength and bone strength, both. And science has been able to begin to uncover the reasons for that. That lack of gravity results in a significant loss in muscle strength and bone strength as well. In the future, wherever people are arriving on Mars or whatever, they're going to need to take a product like Perfect Strength to be able to function because they're going to experience a significant loss of muscle strength, bone strength, and energy. They won't be able to move around very effectively. So here we identify why myostatin and activin A, two genes that we activate with the Perfect Strength product, have a profound effect on energy channels, signaling pathways. And so here we're involved in gene and signaling systems that are involved in the loss of muscle and bone integrity. Part of what's been identified in the last 10 years has been a very important gene involved in a hormone called irisin, can be stimulated by exercise itself. And the questions was, how can we increase the activity of this important hormone? Because the gene has been identified that's involved, in other words, the gene behind irisin, the beneficial compound that's stimulated by exercise has been identified. And the Perfect Strength product, the activity of this gene that's involved in iris production, which then leads to an increase in another gene that's important in brain function called BDNF, which technically is called brain trophic factor. Iris, pronounced like the flower iris, and also the Greek goddess Iris, is a hormone-like substance, which technically is called myokine. And we deal with a lot of different myokines with the Perfect Strength product. This is one of the most important ones, and that's why we're talking about it. It was termed an exerkine because it's something that's produced directly by exercise or physical activity. And it has a profound effect not only on the muscles and other parts of the body, but the brain itself. FNDC5 is the gene, the specific gene that's been identified as stimulating irisin, and the Perfect Strength product has a significant effect on the FND gene. We're not just talking about wishful thinking, we're talking about a huge effect that the product has on this particular gene that's behind a hormone called irisin, which become very important in the scientific research behind not only rejuvenation of muscle, but also longevity and brain function itself. Myokines are important compounds. AMPK is also involved in this process, and something called NAD. We won't go into a lot of detail about these things, just to identify certain important other factors that are involved in the Perfect Strength product. As mentioned before, the perfect strength product increases the activity of this gene, which then boosts the production of irisin in the body. And this can results in the boosting of protein function muscle, and also helps to regulate the waste products, which are the result of muscle contraction itself. In terms of endurance and energy, it's important to look at not just something that will help to revitalize muscle and brain function, but also stamina or endurance itself, because it's one thing to experience a short burst of energy or the kind of energy that's produced by caffeine or products containing caffeine as a sort of artificial energy boosting. But real energy coming from the foundation of energy itself is also a process of stimulating or increasing endurance and stamina. This whole process also involves activation of the core engine, you might say, that's inside the cell called the mitochondria, and boosting NAD production inside the cells. The formulation involves a sophisticated development of a formulation that will enable these molecules to be formed into a matrix or a complex that becomes more absorbable, what's called bioavailability, which is critical importance related to getting these molecules to actually get into the bloodstream and to get to the muscles, the genes, and the organs in the body. Which, by the way, the heart is also a muscle. And these
Mm-hmm.
same gene sets involved in heart muscle are also involved in your other muscles. We talked a little bit about the process of generating energy, and muscle function also involves the development or production of waste products from oxidation redox reaction. And the perfect strength product also deals with processing the waste products of energy production itself, in a way like a catalytic converter. In summary, we're driving muscle as a result of gene modulation, which involves RNA transcription and translation, mitochondrial aspects, key enzyme activation, the expression of key proteins, a signaling cascade that involves both inner and outer cellular communication, and even muscle stem cell function that involves the dynamic and energetics. Really, it's an entire constellation of different aspects involved that came out of the research. And it's hard in such a short discussion to cover in detail all these things, but this is a 30,000-foot view.
Yeah, that's really good. It's a good layout. And it's but one thing I was thinking about as you were doing the presentation is that we have 10,000 kilometers of cardiovascular tubing, arteries, veins, and capillaries. And each one of those walls, all the way through, we have billions of pulses of little micro muscles that they're required to be able to move everything through peristaltically. And people get hardened arteries, they get all kinds of things as they get older. How does that tie into that system as far as muscle function and deterioration?
Those things are important, and they could be identified or called the signaling pathways.
Mm-hmm.
Broadly speaking, they tried to identify the 4 or 5 different components that people could understand without using too technical a terminology. And for the cardiovascular part, that's really the transmission and the flow of signaling pathways and gateway pathways. I should add that some of the compounds in the perfect strength product, which we don't talk about that much, which are directly beneficial to the cardiovascular system, like the 3-flavanol, which are derived from cacao, which is chocolate. And for the last 30 years, a lot of research has been done on the benefits of chocolate, but there are other issues involved in consuming chocolate that it's probably not something that you would want to consume large amounts each day. But we've taken that compound and put it into perfect strength, and it has a significant effect on the cardiovascular system and the metabolic system. For example, blood pressure. But that's the frosting on the cake. Um, it's just mentioning as an aside. There's other beneficial aspects to the product, but here we're primarily focusing on the most tangible part where this is a major breakthrough, which people are going to be able to experience, is the revitalization of the muscle activity, brain activity, and energy pathways, because that's a tangible thing that you can put your finger on. And some people can detect when their blood pressure is high, obviously, or when it's low without checking their blood pressure. But a lot of people just don't know. They just get carried along by the river and they're suddenly experiencing hypertension, and they wonder why they're so conflicted because they're unable to really control the hypertension. So this is helping to relax the arteries, facilitate better blood flow, which also is important for the brain, because without blood flow and oxygen to the brain, which is another problem that occurs with aging, we're not really dealing with a fundamental signaling pathway that was real important.
Right. And there's no stimulants either. That's the other key thing. We're talking about really driving genuine energy, not some caffeine product or some theobromine. This is just giving the body's ability to produce its own energy at a much better level.
That's correct. And often what we need to emphasize is, especially with the Perfect Strength product, is when people will really notice the difference or the tangible effects that we've been talking about in terms of the muscle and energy when they get out and engage in an activity, whatever that activity is. It might be walking, playing golf or tennis or whatever that is. Where people will notice it the most is when they engage in a physical activity, because then they're going to notice
Mhm.
the change that's happening in their energy levels, endurance, and overall strength. Whether they're going to the gym, working out, or just walking or playing golf, they're going to go, hey, wait a minute, there's something going on here. I can really feel a difference in my energy and overall strength, endurance, and stamina. You can go much further in terms of the goals that you set out. Maybe you're going to walk a half mile or a mile today. All of a sudden, you find you're walking 2 or 3 miles and you didn't even know it because you
Mhm.
didn't get tired.
Yeah, the thing I noticed is it's very inspirational. It inspires me to want to get out there and exercise, whereas a lot of people, they just don't have the gumption to do it at a certain age, but now I have more than ever. And I'm getting into burst interval training, all these different things. A big difference in as far as stamina and endurance, but mostly important the initiation to get out there and do it. And
Sure.
it's exciting because that's we want to feel young. When we're young, we got all kinds of inspiration to get out and get stuff done. And we want to be like that, ongoing, indefinitely, as long as humanly possible. Yeah. So really, at the end of the day, the only person who's really going to benefit from it is a person who takes action and experiences it directly physically. Because with me, I always have to do things to learn and understand them. I can look at all the science and all the data and all the presentations in the world, which are great, especially when you have research like what you've done and you've got validation. But until I have actually put it into my body, I can't know that this is true. And this is one of these products that when you put it in your body, because it teaches you and shows you the power of your own body. This product is simply giving your body the ability to express genetically properly, like you talked about, upregulating the good ones and downregulating the bad ones. It's a significantly, thoroughly thought through process to develop this product. And I'm just very thankful that we have it, Eric, and I appreciate the work you've done and will continue to do in all your research and bringing this to the world. So now it's just the next step is for you to get a hold of the product, get it into your body, and find out for yourself what this is all about. So thank you for your time watching this video and presentation. Thank you, Eric, for coming and sharing this today with me and for our audience and for the people who are enthusiastic about feeling great, looking great, and nothing feels as good as feeling good.
Exactly.
All right, so we'll see you all very soon, and we'll have Eric back on again to have further updates. But for now, that wraps it up, and we will see you all again soon.